And thanks for joining me, everyone. Looks like, yep, thank you very much. Live here at YouTube and all the subscribing stations. Charles Moscowitz live. Thanks for joining me. As I said, Gregory Whitestone is my guest this segment. He's a geologist and the executive director of the CO2 Coalition in Arlington, Virginia. He is the best-selling author of Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. Greg, thanks for joining me today.
I'm glad to be on with you again. And there's I have no idea what you want to talk about because there's so much going on about climate change right now between the new UN IPCC report, the infrastructure bill, and then the pending 3.2 billion, whatever kind of bill it is. So, right. And there's climate change related in all of that.
Well, look, I mean, I'm coming at this as a layman. I'm not a scientist, unlike everyone else who thinks they are. We're surrounded by everybody who just is a walking scientist right now when it comes to climate change. Every time there's there's either a cold snap or a heat snap or a fire, everybody thinks, oh, this must be climate change. And it is climate change. And if you say otherwise, you're a caveman. So I'm trying to see if I can just sift through some of this rhetoric and get to some basic facts here. Is the climate changing due to man-made forces? And if so, is that change in the direction of a warming?
Well, that's a good start here. So we're being told that carbon dioxide emissions by man, by burning fossil fuels, is leading to runaway warming that will lead to catastrophic consequences. Mm-hmm. So let's tear that apart. So yes, carbon dioxide levels are increasing. They've increased from about 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution, and we're a little bit over 400 now. So we've had 130 part per million increase.
Right.
That increase in CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and it has a warming effect on the atmosphere. We would argue, and the CO2 Coalition scientists like Dr. Will Happer, Dr. Patrick Michaels, Dr. Richard Lindzen, all have researched deep into this. And our conclusion here is that the warming effect of CO2 is probably less than 1 degree Celsius for every doubling of I don't want to go too technical here, but it's significantly less than what the UN reports and the media indicate. And that amount of warming is not alarming and not exceptional. They're taking this new UN report, they're taking the most extreme scenarios for both emissions of CO2 and how much warming effect that would have. And then predicting using these extreme and unlikely scenarios of catastrophic warming. And so we look at, so does CO2 cause warming? Yes, but it's probably very modest and greatly overwhelmed by the same natural forces that have been driving temperature since the dawn of time. We're in a warming trend, okay? Mm-hmm. That warming trend started more than 300 years ago. In the late 17th century. It was the depths of the horrifically cold Little Ice Age. So the warming trend that started, blessed warming, I might add, started the warming that got us out of this death-dealing cold of the Little Ice Age. So we've been warming in fits and starts for more than 300 years. And what they'll have you believe is that, well, the first 250 years of that, yeah, that was naturally driven, but not anymore. Mm-hmm. That all changed in the middle of the 20th century. And now it's driven by our emissions of CO2. Well, no, it's not. Those same natural forces that have been driving temperatures up for 250 years didn't stop in the middle of the 20th century, for crying out loud. They're still in place today. And what's really interesting, we look at the heat, the warming, we really didn't start adding a lot of CO2 to the atmosphere until the post-World War II economic boom. It was in that mid-20th century. if we're going to see CO2 driven warming, that's when we should start recognizing it. But yet, just as we started adding a lot of CO2 to the atmosphere, the planet started cooling. In the mid 40s through the late 70s, we went through a 30-year cooling trend. All the while, CO2 is ramping up and it's cooling, the planet's cooling down. Remember, in the late 70s, I was a geology graduate in the late 70s, and as geologists, we were told, it's been cooling for 30 years, and it might, if it continues, we're probably going to the next either major cooling trend or the next ice age, neither of which would be welcome.
Right.
And so it's odd. And then in the late 70s, we went through a period to the late 90s. 98 peaked was the warming. It warmed for 20 years, and that's when we heard about global warming. And then it stopped warming in 98, and it's been pretty flat ever since, actually. And that's when things, they had to stop saying global warming, and now it's climate change, climate catastrophe.
Right, exactly.
Now everything that's unusual is lumped into this man-made climate change agenda. No matter what happens, a condo collapse, too much snow.
Anything in the news is because of it. I mean, war. Before we get into the politics of it, I just want to again look at the science, and basically then what we have right now indeed is a slight warming. There are questions about whether or not it's because of CO2 in the atmosphere, because it's a cyclical thing, and that, as you point out, from the 70s to the 90s, there was a cooling period. But yet there is more CO2 in the atmosphere and has been since World War II. And I think that that's not good because that's air pollution and that can hurt people.
No. You are so wrong about that. Not to be correcting the host.
I don't know. Go ahead. I'm not a scientist.
Oh, no. I'm the executive director of the CO2 Coalition. And we promote the many benefits of increasing CO2. CO2 is not a pollution, is not a pollutant by any means.
Well, isn't it a byproduct of oil and coal, fossil fuel burning?
Yes.
But it's not healthy in the atmosphere, no?
Water vapor is a byproduct of those too. It's not a pollutant. And it's by the same token, CO2, you don't have to get, again, we're at 400 plus parts per million. OSHA doesn't consider a problem until you get over to 10,000 parts per million. We're nowhere near that. So it's not dangerous in that regard. They're calling it, the EPA determined that it was called the EPA endangerment finding under Obama, which was horrible. Under Trump, it should have been undone, because what we see are the many benefits of carbon dioxide. It's driving plant growth. It's driving a greening of the earth. CO2 fertilization effect is a tremendous thing that we're growing more crops because of it. So no, it is not a pollutant by any means. And again, we see the combination, the warming trend that we're in. We've warmed 0.8 of a degree since 1900. Is that alarming to you? It's not to me. And we see more warmth between noon and 2 p.m. on any given day. If you don't like it a degree or 2 degrees warmer, move 150 miles north, and you'll get the same effect. We're seeing a combination that the Earth's ecosystems are thriving and prospering because of this combination of modest warming and increasing CO2. And it's a good thing. By almost every metric, the Earth's ecosystems are improving. And you and your listeners have never heard that.
No.
It's a fact. We're looking at deserts shrinking. The southern Sahara is an area called the Sahel. It's turning into a lush grassland. If you don't believe me, just Google NASA, 2 words, NASA and greening, and you can learn about the Sahel that's greening. People are moving back into that area that haven't lived there in hundreds and thousands of years.
Right.
They're planting crops. This greening of the earth is being found across India, China, Australia, Africa. These formerly arid areas are now becoming green. And it's partly due to, there's a slight increase in precipitation, which is good. And it's because of CO2 fertilization effect.
Now, I've seen some pretty alarming videos, and maybe this is part of a propaganda effort. I don't know. All I know is what I see. With regard to Greenland, that the ice cap on Greenland is rapidly melting, I've seen videos showing images of it. I haven't actually seen videos of the ice cap itself, but there's all this kind of like imaging and computer data research kind of stuff that shows that Greenland is rapidly melting, and that this is going to cause a rise in the sea level across the Atlantic Ocean. Is that going on or what?
No. Is the northern polar ice cap retreating? Yes, it has. We're in a warming trend. Of course, we're going to get glacial retreat, which leads to sea level rise.
Okay.
And that sea level rise started, and the glacial retreat started in the mid 1800s. Remember, I said that the warming trend we're in started in, well, actually it was like 1695. So it warmed. And you're going to say, well, Greg, why did glaciers only start retreating in around the mid 1800s if it had been warming for 150 years? And that's because it didn't warm enough. Glaciers are driven by snow and ice accumulation. You know that. Everybody knows that. So you need to get glaciers to retreat, you have to have more melting than there is snow accumulation. It didn't get that warm until the mid 1800s. It was at that point, and actually glaciers had been advancing and sea level had been falling until that point. In the mid 1800s, sea level started rising because of retreating glaciers. And they've been in retreat ever since. But you could melt the entire polar ice cap. It would have scarcely any effect at all on sea level. And the reason is that ice is floating on water. And when you melt, all that ice is displacing that water. You can do that same experiment at home get a big bowl and fill it up with water and put ice cubes, get a bunch of ice cubes in it, mark the water level. And when that ice melts, the water level remains the same. And that's just
it makes sense. Yeah, it takes up the same volume.
Like 90% of the iceberg is underwater. And we see the same thing in Antarctica ice sheets. These ice sheets that, a new ice sheet just calved off of Antarctica. It's the size of Rhode Island. And we're all doomed. No, you're not. It's an ice sheet. It won't affect sea level at all. Not one little bit. Greenland, if you could melt Greenland, that would be a problem. But you know what the temperature is? I didn't check today, but the average temperature on Greenland is lower than negative 30 degrees Celsius, which is
more than enough to keep frozen.
45 degrees Fahrenheit. How do you melt ice? Okay, say it warms up 15 degrees. Now it's 30 degrees negative Fahrenheit. You still can't melt it. There are parts of Greenland that are retreating, and in the summertime, there's ice melt. Yes, but it's not alarming. In fact, in July, we just checked. The ice was actually growing in July when it should be melting. These things change, and we hear about the same thing with Antarctica. But the fact of the matter is, the only place in Antarctica where ice is really melting in any significant amount is called Western Antarctica. It makes up about 10% of the continent. It's Western Antarctica and the Antarctic Peninsula that juts up towards South America. And the reason it's melting, it's curious. As a geologist, I find it fascinating. The warming's coming from beneath the ice because it's due to a geologic rift zone. It's thought to have more active volcanoes per square mile than any other place on Earth. So you got this active rift zone with geothermal heating coming up, melting the ice from below. If it was CO2 driven atmospheric warming, it would be melting from the top down, and it's not. The rest of Antarctica, which comprises 90% or so, has been very stable. And again, Antarctica is really cold. There's no way you're melting that ice anytime soon.
Now, the other story that I hear a lot about in popular culture, I haven't seen any hard science on this. This is promoted by people like Sting at the Police and Bono from YouTube, is that the Amazon is being converted into a desert. It's going to lose its entire ecosystem, and that's going to be catastrophic for the atmosphere and the climate, because the Amazon is an enormous lung of the world. Is there truth to that? What's going on there?
Zero truth. Yeah, they call it the lungs of the world.
Lungs of the
Not
world.
so, not so. The science behind that is that these trees are emitting all this oxygen and sucking up CO2. The truth of the matter, the science tells us that it's pretty much evened out, and it might actually be a net uh, uh, positive emitter of CO2. And we work closely with we work with a group called the Intellectos of Brazil, and our friend there, Rafaela, is in fact we're doing a video with them, and this group is similar to the CO2 Coalition of scientists, and they've created this group to tell the truth about Brazil and the rainforest. And Rafaela just laughs. She goes, "These people, they think you can burn the rainforest." She goes, "You can't burn the rainforest. It's a rainforest. It's wet. You can't burn it." Now, what you do see is they're cutting parts of it down, but it's not nearly the amount that Sting and Bono and the rest of them want you to believe. And
Okay.
what they do, and there fires there every year. Yes, it's been going on for a long, long, long time. They light the grass. It's grasslands that they light every year. And I got pictures of they have little burners. They go around and light the grass, and they burn it off every year. And
Mhm.
it's just part of their agricultural process. And they do burn part of when they cut the rainforest down for more grasslands. They burn the timber that they cut down. But it's not like there are these fires raging out of control that are
But does that
burn the
regenerate
rainforest.
itself? Does that regenerate itself at any point? Are there new rainforests developing?
Well, you could if it was just left to its own regard, but there are people that live there that graze cattle and they have
Right.
agriculture. It's very poor soil. It's a very red, iron-rich soil that's not very
Mhm.
thick. And this is the Indians, the natives. It was a slash and burn agricultural technique where
Right.
they would
That
cut.
was that was the atmosphere, the agriculture of the Western Hemisphere. In fact, when the Pilgrims landed in Boston, where I am, there was less forest than there is today because they were slash and burn. I mean, there was meadows in order to do hunting. Now, I watch the 6 o'clock news with Lester Holt. I do it because I do it so you don't have to, like I like to say to my audience. Um, and it gives a good glimpse into what the illuminated ruling class is pushing at any time. And they're pushing this idea that these big forest fires in California right now, particularly the Dixie Fire, and fires in Greece and in Turkey and in Siberia and in other parts of the world are unprecedented. They are enormous. And they flat out say that this is because of global warming. What say you?
Not so, once again. And let's just take a look. I haven't looked in detail like about Greece or some of these, but I know a lot about Oregon and California fires. We have some true fire experts at the CO2 Coalition. Jim Steele is one of those that's written a lot about this,
Mm-hmm.
and he's in Oregon. Gordon Folks is another member of ours that writes a lot about it, and he's in Oregon also. What we see is, for example, it's forest mismanagement that has contributed to the really big fires. And if you look, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy tells us that there are 4 to 5 times too many trees per acre in today's forests than what there should be for a healthy forest. And not only that, uh, we've gotten away from what had been the process, which had been, if you look back in the 1800s before when we first arrived there in the Sierra Nevadas, in Oregon, in California, you'd see the areas that are now timbered and forested. You'd see it was mostly grassland with stands of timber. And if you look closely at the trees, there weren't any limbs until you got 15 or 20 feet up in the air. And that's because almost on an annual basis, these grass fires would sweep through. Some of them were intentionally set, and they'd sweep through, and they weren't intense enough to light the trees on fire.
Mm-hmm.
They would. It was a process. But now we look. Now it's all forest. We don't have that occurring. And then we stopped timbering in the national forests in the 1980s. Remember the spotted owl, and so if you love spotted owls, I hope you love your spotted owl roasted and well done, because That's what you've got right now in some of these fire areas.
That's
So I guess we have to destroy the forest to save it.
to save the spotted owl so we could put it in the zoo.
Now think about this too. It's not, you and your listeners understand that with lots of trees, there's more fuel. That's understandable. So when there is a fire, it's more intense. And what we have here is not only that, but when you stop timbering, it used to be if there was a fire, they could use the logging roads to get back to the fire and put it out.
Sure.
And now those logging roads have grown up. They can't access. The only
Well,
way
they have this whole idea of the pristine nature, the Gaia principle, that somehow nature should exist without human involvement, that's some kind of utopia, which of course is crazy because humans are involved in nature. We're part of the earth. And so if we build a superhighway, that's natural. But, the other difference I draw is that in Germany has centuries of experience handling forests. There's a lot of forests in Germany, and they really revere their forests, but they treat them like you treat a crop. They have the roads, they clear the brush, they maintain them. And there are very few forest fires in Germany because of that.
Well, let's think too, just go back to the 4 to 5 times too many trees per acre. The other thing that people don't realize, the second cause of soil moisture loss, the first is evaporation. That's easy to understand. The second for soil moisture loss is the amount of water that's sucked out of the ground by the plants and the trees. Well, now you got 4 to 5 times too many trees, all competing for the same scarce soil moisture. So what it's doing is aggravating an already arid condition. So here we are, we've got more fuel, more arid conditions, and no logging roads to put out any fires that start. It's just a combination.
Crazy.
It's our, they want to go back to the pristine earth, and they thought they could save the forest by getting man out of it, and no more timbering, no more logging. And in fact, they've contributed to, we can blame this on these forest management practices.
And these people know better. So my guest is Gregory Whitestone, and you were with the CO2 project coalition. You're an author. The book you've written is Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. Yep, there it is.
There it is.
Excellent.
And I'll tell you, I got shocked about a month ago.
Yeah.
My phone started blowing up when I was driving, and I got back and I saw what it was about. Here, Candace Owens on her podcast.
Oh, great. Yeah.
She held my book up.
Wow.
She was talking about climate change. She held my book up and she said, "This book has changed everything I believe about climate change." She said, "Every child in America needs to read this book." And I was blown away. I had never talked to her, and I still haven't.
Oh, she's huge. Great talk.
Yeah. And you can't buy that kind of publicity or that kind
Get
of
your people to get you on a show. So, Greg, this then begs the question about the politics of this. People who are mismanaging the forest, they know damn well what they're doing. These are not stupid people. They know that this is going to cause fires. And more fundamentally, you have an international media operation. Al Gore is just one tip of the, he just is a politician and a hack that's exploiting where the power is. He could see that, but the power is in this promotion of global warming as an incoming catastrophe. Now, again, if there is global warming, then there is, but the way it's being presented, and including to young children and to young people that I know, is the old Chicken Little, henny penny, the sky is falling. We have to, people are like every little thing there, it's like it's basically a massive conspiracy theory that the world is about to burn to a crisp unless you do what? I don't know. What is their agenda? Why are they doing this?
I get asked that question quite a bit.
Yeah.
You've asked it carefully. I think the question you're asking is, why are they lying to us?
Yes. Okay.
What it comes down to, and they are.
Right.
I'm a scientist, and I'm going to turn it back to you and your listeners, because you are just as qualified as I am to tell me why they're doing it. I can tell you what they're telling you and why it's wrong as a scientist. I can provide the science, the facts, and the data. that says, Charles, they're telling you X and the science says Y. But again, I can't see inside men's and women's souls to see what their motivation is. I don't know. And once again, everybody listening to this is just as qualified as I am to say why they're doing it. Is it control? Is it control, taxation, funding?
Well, it's very suspicious because it seems to be this international effort. I mean, there's the Rio conference in the 1980s, which out of that emanated the 99 Project, which involves bureaucrats worming their way into local communities in the United States and passing various of these environmental laws, which not always make sense and which is usually behind the back of the taxpayer. And you've got like the scandal in East Anglia University in England, where they found out that all these global warming statistics have been cooked. And yet the big money, the grants, the huge endowments go to people and to scientists who promote the global warming agenda, and those who don't get cut off at the knees. It's kind of the way, I mean, not to run an analogy here, but Robert F. Kennedy is about to issue a book about Dr. Anthony Fauci, saying that he's doing the same thing in the virology department. For 40 years, he's had his hands on billions of dollars in grant money, apparently, that he can make decisions over. And if someone doesn't kowtow to his particular scientific theories, they get cut off at the knees, whereas other people get rewarded, like the Wuhan lab, for example. They get rewarded because they're promoting the particular theories that he wants promoted. So it gets into, and again, I know I'm begging the question here, but the question is why? What is the agenda here? I mean, if they're lying or if they're promoting a particular point of view, which may have some truth, why are they doing this? What are they gaining from it? There must be some kind of a raison d'etre behind all of this.
Well, there are a lot of people that, who's going to benefit most from this? China.
Okay.
China.
Yeah, well, that's right.
China. They're controlling the critical minerals out of there.
I know they control the rare minerals that we need for our cell phones and much of our technology.
To get to Joe Biden's fantasy of all the electric vehicles and all the electric heated homes, he doesn't want you to heat your home with natural gas. He wants everyone to be have electric baseboard heat or heat pumps. He doesn't want anything other than that. And to do that, it requires large amounts of batteries that all require rare earth minerals.
Yeah, lithium and all the rest, sure.
Right, cobalt.
Ions.
And 80% of those elements and minerals are processed in China. The cobalt, it's mostly mined in the Congo using child labor. And then it's...
And I don't think there's any particular evidence that either it's more energy efficient or it's less polluting either. Or is there?
What,
I mean, maybe some. I mean, these gigantic batteries.
No. I mean, I've just completed a commentary here on the fire danger from electric vehicles. These lithium-ion batteries just combust. They do. It's rare, but it happens. And we've had cases where the charging vehicle was in the garage of a home and it caught fire and burnt the entire home down. There were 2 cases over the last couple of months in China and in Germany where electric buses were parked in the bus garage at night and caught fire while they were charging.
Oh, it's happening right now. I've been reading in California where the state has spent probably who knows how many billions converting their buses to battery powered, and it's a disaster. The buses are lighting on fire. They're not working. They don't work in the heat. They're melting. I mean, it's...
Well,
it's
think about this. There are 2 towns in Bavaria that have banned electric vehicle parking in garages inside.
Right.
What's going to happen? It's scary. It's horrifying. What's going to happen when there's an electric vehicle in an underground parking garage below an apartment building or an office building that catches fire 2 levels down? How do you put it out? You don't. You have to just let these things burn out. It takes a day. And my goodness, it'll be a conflict. It's going to happen. I'm not hoping for it. I'm just saying it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it happens. And
I mean, look, I think there's nothing wrong with our private sector and our scientific community developing these technologies. I mean, I happen to drive a hybrid, and I've cut my gas costs in half, and I love it. But at the same time, you can't just simply have the government come in and throw out a decree telling people they have to do this and investing billions and hope that it happens. It has to be a private sector development. There has
not only that, just think about, I was just on with a fellow from New Orleans, or actually Baton Rouge this morning, and I told him, I said, what happens if Joe Biden gets his dream and most everybody's got electric vehicles. Now all of a sudden there's a Category 4 hurricane bearing down in New Orleans. What everybody piles in their vehicle and starts heading north away from the hurricane. And he says, oh my goodness, he says, I've been in that. It's 5 or 8 miles an hour. Well, how far are you going to get in an electric vehicle? You're not very darn far before you have to recharge, and everybody's going to need. Now you got millions of people trying to recharge their electric vehicles.
Plus, I mean, you can't even. I mean, with the gas, you go to the gas station, it takes about 5 minutes. Whereas with electric, you have to leave it overnight.
Well, you're in New England, right? So
right.
Right. So what happens? Everybody up in your area, you've been caught in a snowstorm, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you've been caught in your car, and they'll come and get you, and you'll get plowed out. What if you're in an electric vehicle? What happens when you have to? You think of what your range will be with your heater on. It's 12 degrees and 20-mile-an-hour winds, and you're going to have to make your car last with an electric vehicle. You're going to have to sit there without the heat on. If you use the heater, it'll crush your mileage. Instead of 180 miles, you might get 80 or 60. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then what happens when
it drains it out?
Right. If you're in a Ford Escape or any other kind of SUV, you can just sit there and idle for hours with the heater on. Can't do that with an electric.
No, it drains it out. I mean, the battery will be sucked right out of power.
I think there are huge safety issues that haven't been considered.
So anyway, but we're touching on the question of why it is that this international elitist illuminated establishment is pushing these agendas and financing them. I think there are political questions that we probably don't want to get into right now. It might have to do a little bit with the Great Reset that I've been talking about, promoted by Klaus Schwab of Belgium. He also wants to have people stop eating meat, and other things toward a world socialism. I don't know exactly how it's connected to that, but it does seem to me to be mighty connected, because there's nothing really incentive-wise behind any of this. And it certainly isn't good for working people or good for the pocketbook, any of these things. But Gregory, your basic thesis is then, to wrap things up here, that the global warming story as it's presently presented is not, if not a hoax, it is very well twisted and contorted from any actual semblance of science.
I would say sleep well. There is no climate crisis. There is no climate emergency.
Thank you.
There isn't. Life is good.
I'm not going to mention that to certain relatives of mine, or there'll be an implosion, but that's okay.
It's the truth. Life is good and getting better because of climate change.
Yeah.
And I like that. That's a good thing. My philosophy, just in one sentence, is we should use all of Earth's resources for the betterment of mankind and do it as good stewards. Bam.
Exactly. No, I'm totally with you. And that's the conventional view. And it's also the scientific view. So, Greg, let my listeners and viewers, again, know about your book and where they can reach you, or anything you'd like to impart.
Yeah, so it's Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want to know. You can, if you don't want to buy it through Amazon, you can go to inconvenientfacts.xyz. If you want to learn more about the CO2 Coalition, we're the tip of the spear when it comes to science. Go to co2coalition.org. But you can also get my smartphone app, like we talked about, Inconvenient Facts.
I wonder if Al Gore has read your book.
I don't think so.
All right, Gregory Whitestone. Thanks so much for joining me, as always.
Thank you.